Part 4. Marnus Bicknell Willett has no hope that any part of his tale will be believed except by certain sympathetic friends, hence he has made no attempt to tell it beyond his most intimate circle. Only a few outsiders had ever heard it repeated, and of these the majority laugh and remark that the doctor surely is getting old. He has surely been advised to take a long vacation and to shun future cases dealing with mental disturbance. But Mr. Ward knows that the veteran physician speaks only a horrible truth. He himself see the noisome aperture in the bungalow cellar? Did not Willett send him home, overcome and ill, at 11 o'clock that portentous morning? Did he not telephone the doctor in vain that evening and again the next day? And had he not driven to the bungalow itself on that following noon, finding his friend unconscious but unharmed on one of the beds upstairs? Willett had been breathing stertorously and opened his eyes slowly when Mr. Ward gave him some brandy fetched from the car. Then he shuddered and screamed, crying out loud, "That beard, those eyes, who are you?" A very strange thing to say to a trim, blue-eyed, clean-shaven gentleman whom he had known from the latter's boyhood. In the bright noon sunset, the bungalow was unchanged since the previous morning. Willett's clothing bore no disarrangement beyond certain smudges and worn places at the knees, and only a faint, acrid odor reminded Mr. Ward of what he had smelt on his son that day when he was taken to the hospital. The doctor's flashlight was missing, but his valise was safely there, as empty as when he had brought it. Before indulging in any explanations, and obviously with great moral effort, Willett staggered dizzily down to the cellar and tried the fateful platform before the tubs. It was unyielding. Crossing to where he had left his yet unused tool satchel the day before, he obtained a chisel and began to pry up the stubborn planks, one by one. Underneath, the smooth concrete was still visible, but of any opening or preparation there was no longer a trace. Nothing yawned at this time to sicken the mystified father who had followed the doctor downstairs, only the smooth concrete under the planks. No noisome well, no word of subterranean horrors, no secret library, no Kerwin papers, no nightmare pits of stench and howling, no lavatory or shelves or chiseled formula. No. Dr. Willett turned pale and clutched at the younger man. Yesterday he acted softly. Did you see it, hear, and smell it? And when Mr. Ward himself, transfixed with dread and wonder, found strength to nod an affirmative, the physician gave a sound, half a sigh and half a gasp, and nodded in turn. "Then I will tell you," he said. For an hour, in the sunniest room they could find upstairs, the physician whispered his frightful tale to the wondering father. There was nothing to relate beyond the looming up of that form when the greenish-black vapor from the calyx parted, and Willett was too tired to ask himself what had really occurred. There were futile, bewildered head-shakings from both men, and once Mr. Ward ventured a hushed suggestion. "Do you suppose it would be of any use to dig?" The doctor was silent, for it seemed hardly fitting for any human brain to answer when powers of unknown spheres had so vitally encroached on this side of the great abyss. Again, Mr. Ward asked, "But where did it go? It brought you here, you know, and it sealed up the hole somehow." And Willett again let silence answer for him. But after all, this was not the final phase of the matter. Reaching for his handkerchief before rising to leave, Dr. Willett's fingers closed upon a piece of paper in his pocket, which had not been there before, and which was companioned By the candles and matches he had seized in the vanished vault, it was a common sheet, torn obviously from the cheap pad in that fabulous room of horror somewhere underground, and the writing upon it was that of an ordinary lead pencil, doubtless the one which had lain beside the pad. It was folded very carefully, and beyond the faint, acrid scent of the cryptic chamber, bore no print or mark of any world but this. But in the text itself, it did indeed reek with wonder, for here was no script of any wholesome age, but the labored strokes of medieval darkness, scarcely legible to the layman who now strained over it, yet having combinations of symbols which seemed vaguely familiar. The briefly scrawled message was this: and the mystery lent purpose to the shaken pair, who forthwith walked steady out to the ward car and gave orders to be driven fast to a quiet hill and dining place, and then to the John Hay Library on the hill. At the library it was easy to find good manuals of paleography, and over these the two men puzzled till the lights of the evening shone out from the great chandelier. In the end they found what was needed. The letters were indeed no fantastic invention, but the normal script of a very dark period. They were the pointed Saxon minuscules of the 8th or 9th century of the Common Era, and brought with them memories of an uncouth time, when under a fresh Christian veneer ancient faiths and ancient rites stirred stealthily, and the pale moon of Britain looked sometimes on strange deeds in the Roman ruins of Caerleon and Hexhaus, and by the towers along Hadrian's crumbling wall. And if you look at beliefs and practices, Christianity really didn't bring anything. It renamed things, including adapting and combining characters of mythology to adapt into their own mythologies. And later, maybe deciding, Lucifer is too universal of a title or a role. We want to say Jesus is something greater than that, or that's the similitude of that. So so they demonize terms like Lucifer and whatnot. But the words were in such Latin as a barbarous age might remember. Corvinus necundus est cadaver aqua forti dissolvendum nec aliquid retinendum teca ut potes, which might roughly be translated: Kerwin must be killed, the body must be dissolved, and aqua fortis, nor must anything be retained. Keep silence as best you were able. Willett and Mr. Ward were mute and baffled. They had met the unknown and found that they lacked emotions to respond to it as they vaguely believed they ought. With Willett especially, the capacity for receiving fresh impressions of awe was well nigh exhausted. But both men sat still and helpless till the closing of the library forced them to leave. Then they drove listlessly to the Ward mansion in Prospect Street and talked to no purpose into the night. The doctor rested toward morning, but did not go home, and there was still there Sunday noon when a telephone message came from the detectives who had been assigned to look up Dr. Allen. Mr. Ward, who was pacing nervously about in a dressing gown, answered the call in person and told the men to come up early the next day, when he heard the report was almost ready. Both Willett and he were glad that this phase of the matter was taking form, for whatever origin of the strange, minuscule message, it seemed certain that Kerwin, who must be destroyed, could be no other than the bearded and spectacled stranger. Charles had feared this man, and had said in the frantic note that he must be killed and dissolved in acid. Alan, moreover, had been receiving letters from the strange wizards in Europe under the name of Curwen, and palpably regarded himself as an avatar of the bygone necromancer. While certainly the person operating aright is operating in the position. Now, are they saying that they're Muhammad or Merlin or whatever? Usually not. And now, from a fresh, unknown source, had come a message saying that Curwen must be killed and dissolved in acid. The linkage was too unmistakable to be factitious, and besides, was not Alan planning to murder young Ward upon the advice of the creature called Hutchinson? Of course, the letter they had seen had never reached the bearded stranger, but from its text they could see that Alan had already formed plans for dealing with the youth if he grew too squeamish. Without doubt, Alan must be apprehended, and even if the most drastic directions were not carried out, he must be placed where he could inflict no harm upon Charles Ward. That afternoon, hoping against hope to extract some gleam of information anent the inmost mysteries from the only syllable, from the only one available, from the only available one capable of giving it, the father and the doctor went down the bay and called on young Charles at the hospital. Simply and gravely, Willette told him that all he had found, and noticed how pale he turned as each description made certain truth of the discovery. The physician employed much dramatic effect as he could, and watched for a wincing on Charles's part when he approached the matter of the covered pits and the nameless hybrids within. But Ward did not wince. Willette paused, and his voice grew indignant as he spoke of how the things were starving. He taxed the youth with shocking inhumanity, and shivered when only a sardonic laugh came in reply, for Charles, having dropped as useless his pretense that crypt did not exist, seemed to see some ghastly jest in this affair, and chuckled hoarsely at something which amused him. Then he whispered in accents doubly terrible because of the cracked voice he used, "Damn 'em. Do they eat? Damn 'em. They do eat, but they don't need to. That's the rare part. A month, you say, without food? Lord, sir, you be modest. Do you know, that was the joke on poor old Whipple, with his virtuous bluster. Kill everything off, would he? Why, damn, he was half deaf with the noise from outside, and never saw or heard aught from the wells. He never dreamed they were there at all. Devil take ye, those cursed things have been howling down there ever since Curwen was done, for 157 years gone. But no more than this could Willette get from the youth. Horrified, yet almost convinced against his will, he went on with his tale, and hoped that some incident might startle his auditor out of the mad composure he maintained. Looking at the youth's face, the doctor could not but feel a kind of terror at the changes which recent months had wrought. Truly, the boy had drawn down nameless horrors from the skies. When the room with the formula and the greenish dust was mentioned, Charles showed his first sign of animation. A quizzical look overspread his face as he heard what Willette had read on the pad, and he ventured the mild statement that those notes were old ones of no possible significance to anyone not deeply initiated in the history of magic. Remember the story of Aleister Crowley and his wife in, was it the Great Pyramid? That how Calvin Rose had the vision, but then he found an artifact in the Cairo Museum. But, he added, had you but known the words to bring up that which I had out in the cup, you had not been here to tell me this. 'Twas number 118, and I conceive you would have shook that had you looked it up in my list in the other room. 'Twas never raised by me, but I meant to have it up that day, and you came to invite me hither." Then Willette told of the formula which he had spoken, and the greenish-black smoke which had arisen, and as he did so, he saw true fear from the first time on Charles Ward's face. It came, "And you be here alive." As Ward croaked the words, his voice seemed almost to burst free of its trammels and sink to a cavernous abyss of uncanny resonance. Willette, gifted with a flash of inspiration, believed he saw the situation, and wove into his reply a caution from a letter he remembered. "Number 118, you say, but don't forget that the stones are all changed now in 9 rows out of 10. You're never sure till you question." And then, without warning, he drew forth the minuscule message and flashed it before the patient's eyes. He could have wished no stronger result, for Charles Ward fainted forthwith. All this conversation, of course, had been conducted with the greatest secrecy, lest the resident alienists accuse the father and the physician of encouraging the madman and his delusions. Unaided, too, Dr. Willette and Mr. Ward picked up the stricken youth and placed him on the couch. In reviving the patient, mumbled some many times of some word in which he must get to Ornate and Hutchinson at once. So, when his consciousness seemed fully back, the doctor told him of those strange creatures, and at least one was his bitter enemy, and had given Dr. Allen advice for his assassination. This revelation produced no visible effect, and before it was made, the visitors could see that their host had already taken the look of a hunted man. After that, he would converse no more, so Willette and his father departed presently, leaving behind a caution against the bearded Allen, to which the youth only replied that this individual was very safely taken care of, and could do no one harm, even if he wished. This was said with an almost evil chuckle, very painful to hear. They did not worry about any communications Charles might write with that monstrous pair in Europe, since they knew that the hospital authorities seized all outgoing mail for censorship, and would pass no wild or outre-looking missive.